Hey, welcome back. Hope y'all having a great day. Hope it's not any colder there than it is here, because it was 0 last night. Let's pick up where we left off yesterday. I want to talk about customer service in the supply chain, which brings us to this topic that we talked about a little bit yesterday or in our first video. Perfect order fulfillment. This is probably one of the best metrics in the supply chain world. It measures how well the supply chain is doing in taking care of the customer's needs. Now, we discussed these 6 rights in the first video. The way you calculate perfect order fulfillment is you take the percentage of time right product times the percentage of time I get to the right place times the percentage of time I get to the right quantity times the percentage of time I get it to the right time times the percentage of time I get to the right condition times the percentage of time that I give you the right billing or the right invoice. So the reason I ask is 99% good enough. When you take 99 times 99 times 99 times 99 times 99 times 99, you get a 94.1% perfect order fulfillment. And that's not bad. 94% of the time, I'm taking good care of the customers. But look what happens when I drop down to 95% across the board. Now 95% right product times 95% right place times 95% right quantity times 95% right time times 95% right condition and 95% of the time I give you the right invoicing, I'm now only at 73.5% perfect order fulfillment. That's not quite so good. Over 25% of the time using this calculation, I'm not taking care of the customer. That ain't good. Those customers are going to go somewhere else, unless I've got a monopoly, and there are very few of those left. The key here is a lot of companies tend to stray away sometimes from perfect order fulfillment if it makes them look bad. And here's what I know about statistics. And I've taught statistics several times. I'm by no means a statistician, but I do know that human nature is most folks use that statistic that makes them look the best. And let's assume that your boss is not a supply chain or logistics person. They've never had a supply chain or logistics course. Which would you rather tell them? Boss, we have 6 critical measures that we look at in the supply chain world. And out of those 6 critical measures, we're at 95%, each one of them. Boss going to go, 95%, that's an A in anybody's book. Or would you rather tell them we have this supply chain metric that really, truly measures how well we're doing in the supply chain world? And in that metric, you know, when we calculate this properly, we're only at 73.5%. That's barely a C in anybody's book. That's not good. So unless I'm doing real well in perfect order fulfillment, a lot of companies choose to look at the individual 6 pieces here instead of looking at the metric that really truly measures how they're doing. Now let's look at, now we've got the customer service out of the way. Let's look at the components of supply chain management. And some of these we're going to look at in a little greater detail later in the semester because they deserve a more thorough look at. Okay. Procurement. Procurement is critical. Procurement is where it all starts. Finding the suppliers, negotiating with the suppliers on the 6 rights, delivery terms, payment terms, quality terms, and then making sure the supplier gets paid. The delivery is made and the supplier gets paid. Now, Procurement. It's a nice fancy supply chain word. It's the same thing we do every time we go to the store. Now, here where I'm living in Lawrence, Kansas, we've got about 7 different grocery stores we can choose from. Now, if I go to the store, I go down here to the local subsidiary of Kroger's, they're not going to negotiate with me. They're not in that business. But I'm picking my primary supplier, the grocery store itself. Within the store, I can pick the quality and the price based upon the different brand names or generic names or store brands. I can determine whether to have, I can order online, have it delivered to my house. I can order online, pick it up myself, or I can go pick it up myself. The delivery terms. In payment terms, I can pay cash, debit card, credit card. So it's in a microcosm level, we do procurement all the time at the local level. A little more complicated at the corporate level. I'm not going to try to gloss over that, but it's the same basic thing at the corporate level that we do for ourselves and our families at the individual level. Part of the important part of procurement is relationships with the suppliers. And why is this critical? Because we spend a lot of time and a lot of money dealing with suppliers, evaluating suppliers, grading the suppliers, negotiating with the suppliers, asking for concessions from the suppliers. Relationships are critical. In logistics and in supply chain, in particular, in business in general, relationships are critical. I need to treat my suppliers, therefore, like they're part of my supply chain. If you think back to what we discussed in the first video, when we talked about the supply chain operations reference model, the SCORE model. Plan, source, procurement, make, deliver, return, enable. My sourcing and my supplier's delivery is that link in the chain that keeps the chain going. I've got to treat my suppliers like they're part of my supply chain, because they are. They're part of the supply chain. If I don't treat them like that, I may find myself in a bind, and my supplier's like, okay, so we don't care. We'll support somebody else. Within the procurement world, there's several ways of doing sourcing, finding the suppliers. Now, it used to be outsourcing was only a short-term decision to get us through peak periods. Now, for the last couple of decades, outsourcing has been a long-term strategic decision, and maybe one of the reasons we're having issues right now because we outsource so much and we lost our ability as a country to provide goods and services, thus causing the backlog at the ports and shortage on the shelves. But sourcing can really fall into 3 categories. There is multi-sourcing. Multi-sourcing says I've got multiple suppliers and I'm doing business in more than one. Back to my example, my procurement example of the grocery stores. Like I said, we got 7 different grocery stores here in town to choose from. I use almost all of them. I get my seafood from one and my deli food from that one. I get my sushi from that one. I get other meats from the one that's close to me. I get the milk from the one close to me because their prices are cheaper. And then when I want a good selection of veggies, I go to one on the other side of town and buy from them. They have a great veggie selection area, huge. So I do multi-sourcing for my groceries. Second type of sourcing that's out there is single sourcing. Single sourcing says there are multiple suppliers, but I only do business with one. Back to my grocery store example. A lot of folks just use one grocery store. It's convenient. It's either on the way home, It's got wider aisles. It's got brighter aisles. It's got a wider selection. It gives me fuel points so I can get money off on gas, which is becoming more and more critical. Whatever reason, multiple sources, but I do business with one, that's single sourcing. The third type of sourcing that's out there is called sole sourcing. Sole sourcing really means I don't have an option. That company is the only one that provides that good or service. I don't have an option to choose from. So again, using the local area where I live, and it may be very similar where you live. For water and sewage, I don't have a choice. There's one company where I live that provides it. Sole source. For trash pickup, I've got to do business with the city of Lawrence. The city of Lawrence, Kansas is the only trash pickup company available. And where my daughter lives in North Carolina, there are 6 different trash companies. They all go to the same trash dump, but there's 6 different companies. She has the choice to compete on price, on flexibility, how often they pick up. Me, I don't have that choice. I've got a sole source. So multi-sourcing, lots of sources, using more than one. And I'm a huge fan of multi-sourcing. Because if I have an issue with one supplier, I've got another one I'm doing business with that can pick up the slack. Sole sourcing, only one company in the world can do it. Single sourcing, lots of suppliers, I'm only doing business with one. Gas station is a good example. Most people are tied to a gas station. Either they're a few pennies cheaper. I got one of my mentors and good friends worked for ExxonMobil, and he said they did a study, and he said people will drive 15 miles out of the way to save 2 cents on a gallon of gas. It's tied to the store where they shop, so they get fuel points. It's convenient, whatever the reason. Single sourcing, lots of sources, only using one. Next piece I want to look at is distribution. I haven't seen the cost for last year yet. They haven't come out. Hopefully by the time the semester's over, we'll have these costs. But 2020, logistics, distribution, what we're going to focus on the rest of the semester. About $1.56 trillion spent on logistics in the United States. About 7.4% of our GDP. Logistics. At the mirror floor is locked, and yeah, I realize now that the image came in backwards. So it goes mirror floor is this way instead of mirror floor is this way. But the mirror floor is locks at the Panama Canal. The Panama Canal by itself, not all the other functions that go along with it, the 4 major ports, the free trade zones, Panama Pacifico, the free trade zone in Cologne, Panama Canal Railway, all the ancillary parts that go with the canal. Just the canal itself, the income from ships going through the canal, about 7% of the GDP of Panama. Logistics. It's a huge piece. It's the movement, as I said in the first video, it's the movement of stuff between point A and point B, and maybe the temporary storing of it while it's being moved, whether it's being stored at the port or stored in a distribution center or a warehouse or all the above. The key with distribution in today's business society is speed. How quickly can I get you the product? That's what makes Amazon so convenient for so many people. Because if you have Amazon Prime, they say you can get 2-day delivery. Walmart.com says we'll give you 2-day delivery. Target.com, shooting for 2-day delivery. Everybody wants to get that product to you delivered as quickly as possible to make it more convenient for you, make them more competitive. And Walmart does it for no extra fee every year. I think I mentioned this in the first video. If I didn't, I apologize. I'll definitely mention it now. Logistics, that ability to distribute products, that's the lifeline of the company. That's the blood of the company. It's what pumps. I think they kind of touched on this in that video we looked at in the first video that I showed you about logistics in Great Britain. It's the heart and the lifeline of the company. I don't care how good my products are. If I can't get it to you when you want it, where you want it, at the price you want, in the quantity that you want, in the condition that you want, you're going to go somewhere else. Part of logistics, and we're going to look at this in a little greater detail later in the semester, but I want to touch on it now. In fact, we're going to look at it in a little greater detail next week. Some of the largest facilities in the United States today are distribution centers. 20 years ago, if you had 300,000 square foot facility, that was a big facility. Today, if you got 300,000 square feet, it's a tiny facility, probably outdated. Average facility is somewhere between 800, 900,000 square feet. Some of them in excess of 1 million square feet. One I designed and operated in Kuwait, 4.2 million square feet. One of the things that's driving the size of distribution centers is this trend for more frequent orders in smaller quantities. You know, back when all we had was warehouses, all we supported was the stores. We shipped to the stores. And it's probably a good point for me to give you my philosophy. My philosophy is a distribution center and a warehouse are not the same thing. A distribution center focuses on getting the product in and getting it out to the customer, whether the customer is a store or whether the customer is you and me, the individual buyers. A warehouse has the same functions as a distribution center, but they tend to store for longer periods of time. If you think about FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, they got some stuff they've been storing in some places 10, 15 years, waiting for the right disaster to come along. If I'm storing stuff 15 years in a distribution center, something's really, really wrong there. We're going to talk about this more in greater detail next week. To make distribution work, the next piece I want to talk about in the supply chain is transportation. We're going to come back and talk about international transportation, but it's part of distribution. I used to not think it was until I designed and operated a distribution center in Kuwait, and I realized you can't do distribution without transportation. I need something to move the stuff on. So let's start with the railroads. Railroads been around for a long time. Rails today, not much faster than they were 100 years ago. There's roughly 95,000 miles of track in the United States, and we're not adding track. Well, I take it back. We started adding track because they're trying to put in a high-speed train between the Orlando airport and West Palm Beach, Florida. It's going to run from Orlando east to Melbourne and then down the east coast of Florida to West Palm Beach. And yeah, they're adding some rail in Hawaii. They've been trying to add rail in Hawaii for over 10 years now. Now the latest projection is they may finish it by 2035. So we're not even going to talk about that. But there's 95,000 miles of track in the United States that are being used today. The railroads kind of broke up into little mini regional oligopolies or mini monopolies. Because you pay, if it's a Union Pacific track and I have a BNSF rail using it, you pay a fee to use their rail. The biggest advantage, I think, of railroads is the cost. The cost of moving a 100-car train is double stacked like this. Like in the picture, I'll show you a better picture in just a second. If it's double stacked, 200 containers, roughly equivalent of 200 trucks. I can move that 100-car train, 200 trucks worth of stuff, for the same transportation cost of driving one truck across the country. So I can move 200 trucks from East Coast to West Coast for the same cost of driving one. So it's extremely low cost. Because I can double stack it, I get pretty high volume. Now, several textbooks have said, well, the complaint is they're slow. Well, yeah, they're not any faster than they were 50, 60, 70 years ago, in all honesty. They are inflexible. I need a rail siding, S-I-D-I-N-G, a rail siding or rail spur to pull the train off onto to offload it. This ain't like the old Western movies where they'd open the doors of the train and kick things out as they drove through town. It doesn't work that way. I need specific rail siding to pull off onto so that I can offload the train. So it's kind of inflexible. Now, one textbook said, well, the complaint is it only moves large loads. Same textbook a few pages later said the advantage is it uses and moves large loads. I'm a simple guy. It can't be both an advantage and disadvantage. It's one or the other. Now, the reason it only uses and moves large loads kind of ties back to the 60s. In the 1960s, there was an experiment. It wasn't planned to be an experiment, but it turned out to be one, called the Railway Express Agency, REA. It was a precursor to FedEx and kind of a competitor for a little while with UPS. Problem with Railway Express Agency was more stuff was disappearing than being delivered. Kind of like the problem right now with rail in Los Angeles. I mentioned in the first video, there's some issues there, people stealing off the trains. Well, there was an article in this morning's paper that talked about the fact that apparently it's been going on for several months. This isn't a new problem. So that's an issue. There's a better picture of trains on rail cars outside Barstow, California. Double stacked. It's called intermodal. We'll talk about intermodal here in just a few minutes. Just hold that thought for a second. Next piece of the transportation part of supply chain supporting logistics and distribution is trucking. Roughly 75% of all the items, not by weight, not by volume, but individual items, roughly 75% of all the items moved in this country move on a truck at some point in time. From the port to the distribution center to the store, distribution center via truck right to your front door. It's a lot more flexible than the rail. Depending on the size of the truck, I can go almost anywhere. There are consolidation, and there's some of these for the rail as well, but there's consolidation sites, internet matching sites. It's one here in the Kansas City area called Freight Quote. Freight Quote is kind of like, it's kind of like the Expedia, Travelocity of the trucking world. You know, those online travel agencies, for the most part, try to fill unused rooms, unused airline seats, unused rental cars. Well, that's what Travel Quote, that's what Freight Quote does. They try to match up shipping excess capacity with shipping needs. You're trying to ship something, you get a better price because you're buying my excess capacity. but I get more business, so everybody wins. The trucking world is split between less than truckload companies and truckload companies. If I'm a truckload company, then when you come to me, you lease the entire trailer, nose to tail, 53 feet, 8 by 8 by 53. You lease the entire thing. If you have a lot of business, that's not a bad deal. The other side of the coin is less than truckload. Less than truckload means it's like UPS, FedEx Ground, Amazon for that matter. You're only paying for the weight and the cube that you're shipping. It's a little more per pound to ship that way, but you don't need the entire truck. Why lease it? Here's a great example of some of the flexibility. I'm sure y'all seen the same things. I take this forklift, I put it on the back of the truck, I park it in the back of the truck. I go to your construction site, I download the forklift, I offload the stuff for your site, put the forklift back in place, go to the next site. All I need to deliver stuff is a trailer and a ramp or a forklift. Next two pieces of transportation, I'm going to cover them kind of together, is air and small parcel carriers. Because they've really that line's kind of blurred over the last 10 years or so. Because all the folks that do small package carriers also do air. The growth of this particular part of the transportation industry is really driven by e-commerce. Consumers want it, and they want it now. And they're willing to pay a little extra to ship it overnight. Because I gotta have it now. I need it now. I may use several modes of transportation. Truck to the airport, air to the next airport, truck to your front door. Most textbooks say this is expensive. I think that's a relative term. If I'm a shipper and I promise you delivery by Friday, is it cheaper for me to ship it to you overnight, to get it to you by Friday, to keep you happy as a customer, or to upset you, get it to you sometime next week and lose you as a customer? I think it's a relative term. And most of them are pretty reliable. There's been some hiccups lately, but they're mostly pretty reliable. And they got some great online tracking for most of the air and small parcel carriers. They can tell you where the product is, for the most part. Occasionally I get an email saying, we're sorry. We don't know where your package is right now. It's not going to be there on time. It's happened in the last year. It's happened way too many times, in all honesty. I have changed who I do e-commerce with. It's a great example of small package and air parcel. You notice in this bottom right-hand corner here, the shape of the container they're putting into the DHL aircraft. It's shaped to fit into the fuselage and get as many packages in that little small piece as I can. Next piece I want to talk about is water. Probably the oldest form of transportation besides putting it on my back and carrying it myself. Very low cost, very high volume. Even today, when the cost of shipping a 40-foot container, this time last year was $1,400 to ship a container from China to the West Coast of the United States. And today, as of this week's spot market prices, it's about $11,000. So if Congress wants to investigate something and figure out why costs are going up, instead of pointing fingers at each other, they need to investigate why the shipping companies are charging so much more for the same size container. Fuel costs haven't gone up 1,000%. Why has the cost of a container gone up 1,000%? But even at that low cost, it's still relatively inexpensive to ship something. It still costs about $1. Ship a pair of shoes from China to the United States in a container. When I'm charging $150, $200 for a pair of Air Jordans, $1 ain't much. Let's be honest. And the bigger the ship, the more containers I can ship on it. One of the issues, and we're talking about security a little later in the semester, one of the issues that's critical, I think, from a logistics perspective with this form of transportation is security. Just the sheer volume of products being shipped and where the containers go once they get shipped. That's an issue. And again, back to the issue in Los Angeles with organized crime and thieves taking stuff out of containers while it's sitting on the rail after it came off the container ships. I can move almost anything. Fits in a container, I can ship it. Doesn't fit in a container, I can ship it. Grain, I can ship it. Fuel, liquid petroleum, I can ship it. No problem. Cars, I can ship it. This is the most common form of international logistics, shipping via water. Again, back to just the sheer volume of what I can move, especially on a ship that holds 20,000 containers. One estimate I came across recently says that roughly 80% of all international trade is on ships. And there's a ship going through the Miraflores locks to the Panama Canal. This is a smaller ship. This one only holds about 4,000 containers. So it can go through the old locks. This is a newer one going through the Cocoli locks, one of the sets of locks for the expansion of the canal. This one holds about 18,000 containers. Now, to kind of put that in perspective for you, how big a train would it take to move 18,000 containers if I double stack them? Well, in the case of Panama, the train would be over 100 miles long. The front of the train would be from one side of the country back to the other before I finish loading the back of the train. That's what makes the Panama Canal such a popular way of shipping products. See if my little video is going to work here. So you can see some of the moving parts here within the port itself. Each one of these gantry cranes is automated. It's programmed to pick up the containers, move the containers, either toward the ship or from the ship onto a truck. You show I'm loading the container here on the right-hand side. So when you think about the backup at the ports right now, and all the discussion in the news about all the ships off the coast of LA and Long Beach, 100 ships last week. Each container has to be moved individually, one at a time, off the ship to a holding area. Then once I pick that container up, I've got to move that container one at a time onto a truck to clear the port. So all these great talks about we're going to fix overnight the infrastructure of the supply chain in the ports, it ain't going to happen. There are a lot of moving parts in the port operations that need to be fixed to fix the backlog. Okay? Here's an example of things not going so well. This was 2 years ago in Hawaii. This was an inter-island barge moving containers from the port of Honolulu to one of the outer islands. Caught a rogue wave and lost a few containers. That ain't a good thing. And then there's another piece of water we need to discuss, and that's the inland water transportation. Barges. This is the Mississippi River. But you can see here the Ohio River. Barges moving on the Ohio River. And a little closer picture of the Mississippi River, barges moving. A great way of moving stuff. An economic way of moving stuff. In fact, look at these facts and figures here. About 500 million tons of goods are moved by barges on the Mississippi River alone every year. Employs about 33 million Americans, or 33,000 Americans, and about $800 billion of economic output. But this part I think is really, I thought really caught my attention. I thought it was kind of interesting when I started researching inland water usage. Look at this. A typical inland barge, 15 times greater than one rail car. Oh, wow. We've already said on one rail car can hold 2 trucks worth of containers. 60 times the capacity of one semi-trailer. Think about that. 60 times the capacity of a semi-trailer right there. It's pretty impressive when you think about it from a volume perspective. Next form of transportation is out there is pipelines. Now, there was a pipeline that ran from Tribal Reservation in New Mexico through Arizona to a coal-fired electric plant in Laughlin, Nevada, down at the kind of the tip of Nevada there. They determined it was more economical to put the coal in a slurry formation and pump it into the pipeline. About 10 years ago, the EPA determined that particular coal-fired plant was the dirtiest coal-fired plant in the country, responsible for about 80% of the pollution below the rim of the Grand Canyon. The owners refused to put scrubbers on their smokestacks, and they shut them down overnight. So that pipeline is sitting empty. So now pretty much the only thing moving in pipelines in this country is oil and petroleum products. I have this high upfront investment to put the pipeline in. I have a relatively low operating cost once it's in place. So it's a great way to move product. I can put it across any kind of terrain. Now, I'm a big fan of below ground pipelines. Vietnam War, there was a lot of petroleum stolen from above ground pipelines. Sometimes there's issues with above ground pipelines. Big fan of below ground pipelines. Okay, not just, well, I'm a big fan of this pipeline here. This is the pipeline in Hawaii. The waves this time of year are just absolutely gorgeous. Unless you're a really good surfer, that takes me out of the category. I don't recommend surfing there, but I enjoy watching people surf there. Because underneath those beautiful waves is a lot of rough volcanic rock and coral reef. But on a cold day like today, this makes me happy. That's the kind of pipeline I'm talking about right there. This is the pipeline in Alaska. Now, here's one of the reasons why I am a big fan of below ground pipelines. About 10 years ago, a couple of bubbas up in Alaska. Wonder what would happen if we shot at that thing. I'm sure it was a thought process. I'm sure beer was involved probably before they started shooting when you heard one of them go, "Hey, Bubba, hold my beer. I don't want to spill it." And if you're from where I'm from in the South, when you hear those words, get out of the area because somebody getting ready to do something really stupid. They started shooting this pipeline. They hit it. There was black crude oil all over the pristine Alaska tundra. Not a good thing. People got upset, as they should. That's why I like below ground pipelines. The last form of transportation I want to talk about is intermodal. Now, intermodal, some people started to use the term multimodal in the last couple of years, which makes a heck of a lot more sense to me than intermodal. Intermodal, multimodal, whatever you see it called, all it really means is I'm using more than one mode of transportation. Think about international shipment. It goes by truck or train to the port, by ship across the ocean, truck or train to the distribution center, truck to the store, and your personal automobile from the store to your front door. Shipped by FedEx, goes by truck to the airport, by plane, by truck, by smaller truck to your front door. The use of 20 and 40-foot containers really makes this work very, very well. Now, I came across this a few years ago. You see the caption on the side, switching milk cans from a farmer's buggy. Rural Road, North Carolina, 1929. Now, I spent a lot of my developmental years in North Carolina. I spent a lot of time there since I left and went in the Army, going back and visiting my dad and visiting other family members. I can't promise you this is milk in these milk cans. 1929 in this country had this thing called Prohibition. Prohibition said we were a dry country. That didn't work very well. It gave rise to what some people call moonshining. The government called untaxed liquor. I know some folks in North Carolina still do it legally now, but they call it North Carolina spring water. I don't recommend drinking the spring water. They gave me a couple bottles of it, a couple jars of it. When the North Carolina National Guard visited the National Training Center while I was still in the Army, I have one of the jars in my display cabinet in my living room. I can tell you the other jar did a great job of cutting the grease off my tools before I moved. That's all I recommend it for. Don't recommend you try to get it in the cut because it'll burn like crazy. So I can't promise you, since there was a lot of this activity going on in 1929 when we were a dry country, I can't guarantee you this is actually milk in these cans, but it is a good example of intermodal using more than one mode of transportation. This is a painting from World War II, and you can see lots of modes of transportation, ships in the background, trains, trucks, more than one mode of transportation, intermodal. This is the rail yard I used to operate in California. Intermodal operations. We put the huge track vehicles, the tanks and other track vehicles on the back of a rail car. We'd move them from the home station to my rail yard in California. We would offload them, put them on a truck, a flatbed truck, move them up the 35 miles to Fort Irwin, California, offload them where they would then go through 2 or 3 weeks of desert warfare training, and then reverse that, put them back on the truck and put them back on the trains. There's some global supply chain things I want to touch on just briefly. And we could spend an entire semester talking global supply chain, but it's not a global supply chain course. I just want to touch on these briefly before we jump off next week into other aspects of logistics. Got free trade zones, global opportunities, expanded supply chains, nations forming trading blocs. The European Union was the initial idea was to create a trading bloc to compete with the North American Free Trade Zone that we had at the time, a Free Trade Act at the time, now replaced by the US, Mexico, Canada trade agreement a couple of years ago. The idea with the European Union is there's no duties or tariffs, go from one country to the next, which is why it's interesting right now to watch what's happening in Great Britain with the Brexit. Saw an article yesterday. They're still forecasting that 50% of the logistics companies and retail companies in Great Britain are going to go out of business because of the changes in logistics and distribution as a result of Great Britain leaving the European Union. Now they've got customs duties, tariffs coming into and going out of Great Britain they didn't have before when they're part of the European Union. You have folks who were working there came back and said, we can't afford to live here if you're not part of the union. The idea is to move goods across the borders freely. When I first moved to Germany in 92, the European Union was not in effect. To go from one country to the next, you had to stop at the border, show your passport. Why are you coming to my country? How long are you going to be here? Where are you going? Where are you going to stay? And you come back, you have to do the same thing. By the time we left and the European Union was in effect, made it pretty easy to travel from one country to the next. In fact, in the military, we discovered it was actually cheaper for us to fly goods into France and truck them into Germany than it was to fly them into Germany once there were no more duties and tariffs to go from one country to the next. But security is an issue. It's a huge issue. We'll talk about security later in this semester. It's a huge issue, though. There's some other problems to think about. Almost every textbook tells you we have regional and national differences we need to consider in the supply chain. We've got regional differences here. Probably right now, what you want in South Dakota is not what I want in Kansas. What I want in Kansas is not what they want in Florida. What they want in California is not what they want in Texas. So we have regional differences here in this country. Why should we expect to be any different anywhere else? I need to know these things. There's different customs and practices and laws. I'll give you an example. When Walmart decided they want to move into Germany, there used to be this great discount chain in Germany called Bergkauf. Literally meant to shop, go shopping. Great store. It was like a Walmart supercenter before they had Walmart supercenters. Except the beauty of this store was straight back. Dead center in the back of every Bergkauf store was a little restaurant. They had great German food, bratwurst, Brötchen, good German beer. Okay, I got to admit, there's not really a bad German beer, but good German beer. So my wife and kids would go shopping. While my wife and daughters are shopping, I'd find what I need, put it in the cart. I'd go back to the restaurant, get me a bratwurst and a beer. They shopped a long time. I had another beer. They shopped a real long time. I didn't care what they bought. But seriously, the quality at Bergkauf was much better. I was wearing a pair of socks yesterday I bought 25 years ago at Bergkauf, and they're still good. The quality is much better than Walmart. But Walmart said, well, what we're going to do is we're just going to buy Bergkauf. Discount chain, we're a discount chain, and we'll just put Walmart on top of Bergkauf. Well, they didn't understand the buying practices or the habits or the desires or the customs in Germany. They went, today, there's no Walmart in Germany, and there's no Bergkauf left there either. The German consumer lost out. This one's like a statement of the obvious, but almost every textbook says this. Foreign markets aren't homogenous. Well, U.S. markets aren't homogenous. Let's be honest. How naive is it to assume that every market's going to be the same? I'll give you an example of that. I was talking to some folks at Payless while I was down in Panama last week. And they told a story that I've heard it before. But since I take a different crew of students every year for the last 10 years, I get to hear the same stories over again. And I get to laugh at some of the same stories, and I get to hear something new every time too. But when Payless, now y'all know Payless is kind of here in the United States, but Payless is doing very, very well in Central and South America. And luckily, they had the foresight to set up a different legal structure for them here in the States so that they can still survive. So they moved about 20 million pairs of shoes last year. But when they moved into Jamaica, apparently there's some differences there. They sent the normal shoe sizes into Jamaica, normal sizes and widths into Jamaica, they sent everywhere else. They had great sales first couple of weeks, and then sales kind of trickled off. What they discovered was, apparently, genetically, the folks in Jamaica have wider feet than and bigger feet than other Central South American Caribbean nations people do. And when they sold out of the sizes that fit them, they weren't selling anything else. They couldn't figure out why. So we can't just assume when you do global supply chain, global logistics, you can't just assume every market's the same. It's very naive, maybe very stereotypical. Quality could be an issue. I spent some time over the last couple of decades at the Granger Distribution Center over in Kansas City, Missouri. Not familiar, Granger, one of the largest industrial supply companies in the world. They got a 1.1 million square foot distribution center there. They've carved out 100,000 square feet of a distribution center just for suppliers shipping stuff from China. And they've got some suppliers that they know that quality is an issue. They have to do a 100% test of all the items from certain suppliers to make sure they're good. And my question to them has always been, every time I go, I ask them the same question: why don't you test them over there before they get here? Why don't you find another supplier? And they always kind of tap dance around the question. Bottom line, now if you saw the old show, The Weakest Link, or have seen the new show with Jane Lynch, The Weakest Link, but nobody in the supply chain world wants to hear those words. You are the weakest link. Goodbye. Like any other chain in any other aspect of life, the supply chain is only as strong as the weakest link. Now, the good news is there are over 1,400 companies in this country alone that do third-party logistics. Some aspect of the supply chain and logistics chain, that's their core competency. So if you can't do it, I can find somebody else that can do it for me. That's the good news. Nobody wants to be that weak link in the supply chain. Nobody wants to be the weak link in logistics. So you got to make sure you consider all of these things and how the logistics system fits into the supply chain and the customer service support to make sure we're taking care of the customers in any aspect of business. But in logistics in particular, everything we do has to be focused on taking care of the customer. Let's kind of wrap this up. So next week, we're going to look at distribution in a little greater detail. The distribution piece of the overall logistics system. Supply chains are complex, which is one of the reasons we're having so many issues right now, because people forgot how complex they really can be and kind of sat back on their laurels and were content, as long as things are working well, to keep on doing the way they're doing business. And really in business, it's adapt or die. And right now what we're seeing is people dying, and companies dying because supply chains didn't adapt. We looked at several definitions of supply chain management, and they all said basically the same thing, except for that one definition from the Association for Supply Chain Management, which said it included cash. Got to have cash to make the world work. We said logistics is a subset of supply chain. They aren't the same thing. That's why we're going to focus on logistics the rest of the semester. But I wanted to cover supply chain up front, because you can't really discuss logistics without discussing how it plugs into the supply chain as a whole. They're global challenges. They're local challenges. We looked at information supply chain. We talked about the bullwhip effect, that distortion that comes from not sharing good information in the supply chain. We're not doing good forecasting in the supply chain. We're not taking into account what's going on that may interrupt the supply chain. That's why we're seeing this backlog at the ports, because nobody thought about the fact that, or some people did, but nobody listened to them, that when people came out of the shutdowns from COVID, they wanted to spend money. They wanted to do things. They wanted to go places. And the products weren't there for them. That's why we're seeing the backlog now. That's why we're seeing shortages, because we forecast here, but we're spending up here. We talked about perfect order fulfillment, those 6 rights, and how that metric is calculated. We talked about the fact that supply chain really is critical to the success of a company. And we looked at Toys R Us and the issues they had because there are supply chain issues that ended up killing the company. We talked about the SCORE model, supply chain operations reference model. It says that every single supply chain has 6 inherent functions, regardless of what you're supplying. 6 inherent functions: plan, source, make, deliver, return, and enable. Have a great week. Please stay healthy. This Omicron variant just is doing crazy stuff. So right here in the small county I live in, we've got like 6,000 active cases right now today. So stay safe, please. Stay healthy. But above all else, and I'm going to remind you several times this semester, but above all else, stay happy. Do not let anybody impact your happiness. Happiness is self-determined. Don't give anybody the power over your life to determine your happiness for you. So stay happy, stay healthy, stay focused. We're off to a great start. There's been some great discussions already. We'll have some more discussion boards next week. Some great discussions. I appreciate the effort you're putting into it already. I know it's difficult, or at least it's more difficult online than in person. But since some of y'all aren't right there at Northern University, well, I'm not right there either. So this allows us to be in lots of places and watch the videos and do the studying from wherever we're most comfortable. So please, we're off to a great start. Keep up the good work. Stay happy. I'll see you next week.